Hello, this is Anna Imagination with the Healing Garden, and welcome to Shifting Perspectives with Triadic Healing. In the 1970s, Dr. Graves wrote and presented something called spiral dynamics. It was proposing a theory that there are stages of growth. Now, these stages of growth are quite literally the stages of growth that every human being goes through from the time they are infants, born, all the way up to the time they die. There is no age restriction or any kind of environmental restriction or a genetic restriction. What there is an educational restriction. It is purely based on how educated or intelligent you are and how and where that puts you on the spectrum. These are lessons, these are ethics stages that a person goes through as quickly or as slowly as their intelligence is. If a person is highly intelligent, they will fly through the stages, the first 6 stages. If a person is lower in intelligence, they will drag and stall out between the first 4 stages. It is very much our evolutional mental development. Not mental, intellectual. Our intellectual development is going to determine our mental health and our mental development. There are rules with these stages of growth. The first rule is that every stage weighs in your definition of autonomy, your definition and relationship to authority, and how well or if you internalize the core ethic that you are supposed to be learning at each and every stage. The second rule, you cannot skip a stage. There is no jumping over to ethical stage 6 and completely missing the first 6 ethics. It's ladder learning. You require the first ethic in order to learn the second. You must have the first 2 ethics to internalize the third ethic. You must have the first 3 ethics in order to internalize the fourth. Now, once you've internalized the lessons, trauma can compromise a previous ethic and take it away from you and conflict it. That's when mental disorders occur. That's when mental illness occurs, is when one of these earlier stages of ethics that you've already learned and internalized has been compromised or taken away from you. That creates a significant unstable foundation that leaves you completely without any foundation for the current ethic you're at. Every one of these stages of growth, every one of these ethical stages determines your perspective. As a result, there are 8, 9, 12 different optional perspectives that a person can be at any given time. So when you meet somebody on the street, when you meet somebody at a bar, when you meet your new boss, you are meeting someone who is at one of these 8 perspectives. In a properly developed human being, where the individual is allowed to exercise and learn their autonomy in the proper healthy order, in an individual where that person can internalize and work and learn their own authority at their own level, the individual will healthily go through the first 6 stages by the time they are 6 years old, if they are provided with a psychologically safe place in order to embrace and internalize each and every ethic in an ideal parenting situation, void of trauma, abuse, and perspective abuse. That's not the case. In most cases, by the time we are 2 years old, our parents dictate which ethic we are supposed to live by And then they will abuse us through abandonment, rejection, or overparenting to ensure that we stay within their perspective expectations. And that in itself is the abuse. What ends up happening is we associate acceptance, love, belonging, and approval with maintaining a certain perspective expectations that our parents put on us. When that occurs, we stop growing, we stall out, we stop internalizing the ethics, we stop growing through the stages. We associate advancement and evolution through the stages as rejection. So we are conditioned as early as 2 and 3 years old to not grow past a certain perspective. As a result, the majority of us are at perspective 4, equivalent to a 4-year-old. That is baby boomers. Narcissists come from perspective 3. Overly religious people, people who are absolutely obsessed with tradition, their culture, and their religion, and making sure that their children conform to those expectations, is perspective 2. And anyone who struggles with addiction, anyone who struggles with self-mutilation, self-harm, or food binging, food disorders, is all struggling with the first perspective. These are people who did not learn how to comfort themselves, which is the first ethic, self-comfort. The second ethic is resourcefulness. And it comes with learning and understanding that you no longer have the autonomy defined by the role you have with your religion, church, culture, community. So that when you internalize resourcefulness, when you learn that you have the ability to become resourceful, you no longer become reliant on the community for those resources. You can do it yourself. As soon as you internalize that lesson, you realize that you are something more than your community. But if you have a parent that absolutely obsesses over religion or insists that the religion is your salvation, it's going to hold you at perspective 2 and stop you from growing into perspective 3. When you enter perspective 3 at 3 years old of age, you are supposed to be equipped with self-comfort and self-resourcefulness, but we don't. In most cases, we have not learned these lessons. So when the third stage perspective occurs, we are ready to go on walkabout. We are ready to embrace our independence, but we lack the 2 tools required to do so. As a result, we learn several other lessons, like it's not possible to ask for help, or we are asking for too much help and we are not relying on ourselves. We never learn what we are capable of. We never embrace humility. We never embrace shame. We never embrace embarrassment. We never learn how to cope with those emotions. If we have a parent who is overparenting, they step in and they do it for us. They enable us. If you have an enabling parent, then they rescue us from these ethical lessons that we are supposed to be internalizing. If you have a negligent parent, somebody who is more offhands than they should, it's going to teach you instead that you can't ask for anybody to help, and it's going to compromise your ability to trust people. Inside each one of these perspectives, you have people who are passive, neutral, or aggressive. Passive, assertive, or aggressive. In the stage 3, passive, these are your empaths. These are people who have learned not to ask for help, who are gentle, who are avoidant, who are withdrawn. People who are assertive learn how to use their boundaries, step up for themselves without being aggressive and without allowing themselves to be a doormat. They are the people who move on to stage 4 because they learn that they have weaknesses and there is a time and a place to finally ask for help. And that is the internalized lesson of stage 3. If you are an aggressive third perspective is somebody who internalizes the lesson to mean that they cannot ask for help. And that's when narcissism develops, when they lash out and try and project their own insecurity onto other people by controlling them. Whereas the passive third perspective will internalize it. And that's where a lot of us get stuck, is third perspective. Once you learn how to ask for help and accept your limitations and weaknesses, once you learn how to embrace humility with a proper balance of self-value, you get to advance to the 4th stage perspective. In the 4th stage perspective, usually that hits around 4 years old if the person is allowed to develop healthy as nature intended. The fourth perspective is somebody who values laws and rules and structure. But if you don't have the three core rules and your overly parenting parents rescued you and forced you into the fourth perspective too soon without you learning those three integral ethics, you're going to cling to the rules and you're going to use the rules to project and abuse other people, which is what a lot of fourth perspectives do, which is what a lot of baby boomers do. It's because baby boomers lack the information needed, the first three ethics, to keep their obsession over control, their obsession over law and order in check. Instead, they project their law and order onto other people to feel in control. They don't feel control because they are lacking the first three ethics, which is the ability to self-comfort, the ability to be self-resourceful, and the ability to understand their own limitations and their own weaknesses and strengths and utilize them accordingly while trusting people. Because baby boomers lack these three lessons in their core ethics, they instead project the fourth perspective, law and order, onto others to feel like they can control. Now you have an entire culture that's obsessed with categorizations, labels, and boxed thinking, so they're trying to form everybody into their little boxes. Now, the millennials come along. Millennials are being born at the fifth perspective. By the time a millennial is 4 and 5 years old, they have already learned the fifth perspective because they are more intelligent than the fourth perspectives, because they are more intelligent than the previous generations, because we are getting smarter. So the millennials are being born at the fifth perspective. The fifth perspective needs to learn self-accountability. Does the millennial generation make sense now? When they learn self-accountability, then they're able to go on to the sixth perspective. Part of self-accountability is being aware and understanding and taking responsibility of how our actions affect others. Now you're ready for the sixth perspective. The sixth perspective is the hippie generation. It is the hippie mindset. It is when you're thinking about recycling, you're thinking about the environment, because you understand from the fifth perspective that your actions are affecting other people. These are the first 6 stages of our growth. They happen in order. They are mandatory. And they are the core stabilizing factor on where you are with your perspective thinking in your stage of growth, who you are in your lifestyle, what kind of a lifestyle you require to live. A sixth perspective is going to be a nonconformist. A fourth perspective is going to be a very strict, controlling conformist. A third perspective is an abuser. Well, let me rephrase that. All abusers are the third perspective, but not all third perspectives are abusers. Daryl Dixon is a third perspective passive. Merle Dixon is a third perspective aggressive. They are both in the third perspective. Neither one of them know when to ask for help, but Daryl Dixon is a passive, so he's an avoidant. Merle is an aggressor, so he's a narcissist. Somebody who is over-religious, over-traditional, over-obsessed with their family and their culture is a second perspective. A mother who is over-nurturing, refuses to let her children get hurt, a helicopter parent, is a first perspective. Now, the first 4 perspectives are what I call foundationals. Foundationals are fantastic for nurturing our children for the next generation. They are incapable of self-governing, because self-governing is the lesson learned at the 4th perspective that gets you to the 5th perspective. An entrepreneur has internalized the first 4 ethics. A 5th perspective is an entrepreneur. That's when you realize you don't have to answer to a system, that you are quite capable of making up your own personal law and personal ethic. You require the first 4 ethics to function in adulthood. Most people do not learn the first 4 ethics. Most people are absolutely inept at managing their adult life, which is why you see addiction, which is why you see people who are abusive, which is why you see people who are violent, which is why people have anger issues, which is why you have a parent who's insisting you get a 9-to-5 job and follow the way of it and be normal and conform and obey. The first 4 perspectives judge people based on a hierarchy of status, depending upon how well you follow the rules, how much money you have, how much power you have, how much you have, how pretty your wife is. This is hierarchical thinking that is 100% a result of the first four perspectives. By the time you get to the fifth perspective and you've internalized the first four lessons, now you're ready for adulthood. Now you're ready to manage and self-educate yourself. Now you prioritize education. The first four perspectives do not prioritize education. They prioritize order, law, and themselves, but only within a certain constraint system. The fifth perspective values education and values growth. The sixth perspective values growth, values community, values everybody, and values themselves, but only a little bit. The sixth perspective needs to learn that they are as important as everybody else. A sixth perspective tends to put themselves lower on the podium because they don't want to be selfish, and they rise up everybody else to make sure everybody else is heard, and they give them everybody else the voice and the space to speak their mind at the sacrifice of themselves. Sixth perspectives are very self-sacrificial. When the sixth perspective learns that they are as important as everyone else's voice, then they move on to the seventh stage perspective. That concludes part one of Triadic Healing. We only talk about the first six perspectives in part one of Triadic Healing. This is the development and the growth of a human being's psychology. All abuse is perspective abuse. All abuse. Every kind of abuse you ever suffered was because someone was telling you that you were not allowed to have your stage of growth. You are not allowed to have your perspective. So if you are a sixth perspective and you live with a third perspective, the third perspective is most likely going to beat you and tell you that you are weird or you are crazy and you need to stay within the confines of the third perspective. If you are a sixth perspective and you live with a fourth perspective, you're probably going to be told that you need to get a job. You're probably going to be told that you are not capable of taking care of yourself, and you are going to be judged based on how well you follow the societal rules. But a sixth perspective is not good at following the societal rules. In fact, the sixth perspective is terrible at following societal expectations. And as a result, the fourth perspective abuses them to keep them over here. Now, when we are abused in this fashion, our subconscious mind learns a lesson. It's not safe to grow. It's not safe to be different. It's not safe to be ourselves. So the subconscious mind suppresses your ethical perspective to keep you obediently conditioned in place of whatever perspective you were abused at. Now, you have two perspectives inside of your mind. You have your abuser's perspective, 2, 3, 4, and you have your own perspective. Your own perspective reflects your identity. Your abuse reflects your subconscious mind. Now you have the two of them in conflict, so that on a bad mental day, your subconscious mind is going to shut down your identity and is going to run your entire life as if you are living in a second, third, or fourth perspective. But your identity needs to be a sixth perspective and needs to express itself at the sixth perspective or the fifth perspective or the seventh or the eighth perspective. And it can't do that because the subconscious mind thinks that's not safe. You can't do that. This creates the emotion cognitive dissonance. Every time we are abused, it is because of perspective abuse, because of the conditioned expectation that we all have to fit within an exact single type of perspective. In most cases, it's the fourth perspective. Inside of an abusive home, it's the third perspective. Inside of a strictly religious home, it's the second perspective. And if you have a helicopter parent that swoops in and oversaves you and takes care of everything and over-enables you, first perspective abuse. But if you are sixth perspective, you are not going to be okay with this. If you are fifth perspective, you are not going to be okay with this. You're not going to be okay with it because you are somebody different than what you are being held expected to be. You are expected to grow. You are needing to grow. You are needing to expand your skills. It's that feeling of, do you ever feel like you're more than you've become? Do you ever feel like you're not living up to your potential? That is because you are a fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth perspective being forced to live like a 1, 2, or 3, or 4. 1, 2, 3, and 4s are highly abusive because they do not value growth. They do not have the education to understand what's going on. They are usually very uneducated and or very ignorant, and they are also violent. So perspectives 1 through 4 are usually highly abusive. Perspective 5 is when you see the abuse really come to a screeching halt, but there's a catch. We all have a higher function and a lower function. Our higher function is where you are first thing in the morning. It's when you're well rested, when you're not stressed, and when you're well fed. That's your higher function. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you switch down to lower function. If you drink alcohol, you switch down to lower function. If you are hangry, you're going to switch down to a lower function. If you are stressed, you're going to switch down to a lower function. So now you are higher function, lower function, and your lower function is always 2 steps down from your higher function. So if you are an ethical 6, when you are hangry, you're going to drop down to an ethical 4. Now here's the fun part. If you are a 5th perspective, an entrepreneur, a CEO, if you value your accountability, when you drink alcohol, you will drop down to a 3rd perspective. And if you are aggressive, you're going to become a violent drunk. That is why people are violent drunks. It's because they're a 5th perspective, drinking alcohol, dropping them down to their lower function, becoming angry drunks. If you know you are a 5th perspective and you know you are aggressive when you are drunk, it's because you are going from 5th perspective down to a 3rd perspective. You should not be drinking alcohol. Now, once you get to 6th perspective and you drink alcohol, you'll drop down to a 4th perspective. Once you get to a 7th perspective and you drop down to and you drink alcohol, that'll drop you down to a 5th perspective. There is no abuse after the 5th perspective because 5th perspective has self-accountability. 5th perspectives understand and learn the value of not violating somebody else's perspective. 6th perspectives learn that their actions affect other people. So there is no abuse once you grow to the point of 5th and 6th perspective. We are supposed to be at 5th and 6th perspective when we are 5 and 6 years old, so that by the time we are 7 and 8, we are at the 7th and 8th perspective. We have learned, if we are left alone to grow naturally like this, we are then learned, we are taught, we know ethically how to set boundaries, how to communicate. That's something you get when you're at the 8th perspective. It's how to set boundaries and how to communicate. But most of us are stuck at perspective 4. Most of us are a 6th perspective, incapable of getting out of the 4th perspective because that's where we were abused to keep us. Our extreme black sheep, our extreme outcasts, our extreme LGBTQIA community, 6 perspectives. If you are transgender, you are a 7th or an 8th perspective. Because by the time you get to 7th and 8th perspective, you stop seeing gender. Gender ceases to exist. Gender, you realize at 7 and 8 perspective, is just another label set by the 4th perspective to keep everyone organized. Transgenders know this intuitively because they are the 7th and 8th perspective intuitively. The LGBTQIA community, identifying yourself depending upon your sexuality, that is 6th perspective thinking. If you are LGBTQIA, you are 6th perspective at least. If you consider yourself pansexual, that is 7th and 8th perspective thinking. Pansexuals view people based off of their energy, not based off of their gender, not based off of any other characteristic. To view somebody based off of their gender and their attractive level is a 4th perspective mindset. These are not oddities. These are the stages of human growth. And we are stunted. We are absolutely stunted. When you get to the 6th perspective, in fact, when you get through all of these, your hippocampus is growing. Your hippocampus is a walnut-sized part of your brain in the dead center that's responsible for intelligence and education. The more educated you are, the larger the hippocampus gets. Trauma shrinks the hippocampus. So if you are significantly traumatized, there is a good chance you are going to stay stuck in the first 4 perspectives. It's why people who are 5th and 6th perspectives who get extraordinarily abused stay stuck in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th perspective without ever growing. It's because you have a small hippocampus. Educate yourself, read books, do mathematics, do Sudoku. Absolutely. And that will grow your hippocampus. When you grow your hippocampus, you get to start advancing through the stages of growth. At sixth perspective, your hippocampus is finally so large that it literally works like a satellite and connects with the electromagnetic field of the planet. Oh, yeah, things get fun there. That's when you can start reading and picking up on the energy. Now, if you're reading and picking up on the energy when you are 3 and 4 years old, well, guess what? You are a sixth perspective. And because you're reading the energy at age 3 and 4 years old, your fourth perspective and second perspective parents are going to get scared. So they're probably going to abuse you for it. And then when you finally get to that point where you get away from your parents and you can go find your own group, your own hippies, your own community, people who understand you, you are actually seeking out people who have the same perspective as you. That is what our friend circle is. It's people with shared perspectives who are in the same perspective growth as you, which is why we don't like going back to our families, because our families, in most cases, are 2, 3s, and 4 perspectives. However, our friends are our own perspective. So if you're a 6 or a 7, your friend circle is going to be a 6 and a 7. But going home during the holidays means stepping back into the wonderful world of second, third, or fourth perspective. Now, as a 6th and 7th perspective, that is not going to feel good. It's going to hurt because we also have an environmental perspective. Our environmental perspective is the environment with which we live around the rules and laws of our ethics. But if you live with a 4th perspective who says the rules, laws, and ethics have to be a certain religion, a certain culture, a certain political stance, and you are a 6th perspective and a 7th perspective, that's going to hurt you because it is creating a cognitive dissonance between the expectations of your parents or the environment and what you actually believe. Now, you are required to wear a mask. That is inauthentic. Mask wearing is perfect inauthenticity. Perfect inauthenticity hurts people. So if you are not a 4th perspective, wearing a 4th perspective mask is going to hurt you. If you are a 3rd perspective and you're being forced to follow the rules of 4th perspective, it's going to hurt you. If you are a 6th perspective and you have to wear a mask to conform to the expectations of 4th perspective, it's really going to hurt you. And if you are transgender and you are all the way over there at the 8th perspective and you have to go visit family who's in the 2nd perspective, not even, no, we're done. That's when you disown your family, you cut them out and you say, nope, we're done with that. Because 8th perspectives cannot go to the 2nd perspective. The perspective gap is too wide. A perspective gap is when you have 2 or more perspectives between you and another individual. So if your mother is a 2 perspective and you are an 8, that is a 6 gap perspective. That's going to fucking hurt you. So you're not going to do it. You can't do it. Now, if you're a 4, you can go to a 2 comfortably. 2 and 4s get along very well. If you're a 5 and you go to a 2, okay, all right, you can manage. A 6 perspective, now the perspective is too wide. 4 is the limit. 3 is pushing it. 4 is out of the question. Now, look at the 6th perspective gap. This is where disownment comes from. This is where you say, I've grown too much. You have people who value growth and people who value comfort or familiarity. You can't have both. You can change. You can say, I'm going to value comfort for a while. I'm done being comfortable. Now I'm going to value growth. Perspectives 1 through 4 value comfort exclusively. No exception. They do not grow because they have no incentive to grow. They are 2, 3, 4 perspective living in a 2, 3, 4 society. They have no incentive to grow. They don't value education. That's why they're foundationals. But perspective 5 is a transition perspective. It can go either way. You might get to perspective 5 and say, I'm good. This is the CEO or the entrepreneur who has their own job. They are self-governing. They're good. They don't care about self-accountability. They won't ever bother to learn it because they value what's familiar. So those are more like a 4th perspective, 5 perspective. It's a 5th perspective acting like a 4. They're in a happy place. But then you look at the 6th perspective. You look at somebody who a 5th perspective who values growth. Now they're definitely going to go on to a 6th perspective. So you have an entrepreneur who says, you know what? I value growth. I want to get better. Eventually, they're going to tap out of 5th perspective. They're going to learn self-accountability because that is the lesson you learn when you value growth. And you are going to eventually become a 6th perspective. 6 perspectives always value growth. Everyone from from 5-6 perspective on always values growth. Everyone from 5-4 perspective and lower always values comfort. Now, with a 6 perspective and higher, or 5th perspective and higher, you will go through stages where you're like, okay, I've grown a lot. I need to rest. That's not the same thing as not valuing growth. I value growth, but I need a break. So they will learn 6, 7, 8, 9 perspectives will learn how to basically use comfort as a tool to nurture and reset themselves so they can go on to the next stage. And that's what you're going to see from 6 perspective and on. So there is something I use called combination theory. Combination theory is knowing the 3 perspectives that are inside of you. If you are, whatever you desire, whatever ethic you align with, that is absolutely your first combination. That is who you are. That is your identity's ethic. I am a 10. The second number is your subconscious mind's age. It is how much abuse you have been put through to keep you at whichever perspective. And that is the age in which you stop growing. So if you were abused by a second perspective, your number is going to be 2. If you were abused by a third perspective, your number is going to be 3. So if you are an ethical 6 perspective and you were abused by a 2 perspective, you are going to have the combination 6-2 or 6-3. That is not alignment. That causes cognitive dissonance. That tells you how much pain you're going to be in, and that's going to determine how many mental illnesses you have and which ones you have. Furthermore, you have an environmental perspective. So if you live alone, the environmental perspective is going to match whatever it is your ethics are. So if you're a 6 and you live alone, it's going to be 6. But if your subconscious mind was abused at 2 or 3, it's going to be 6-2-6. Now, if you live with your parents, who's a 4, and you were abused at 3, and you're a 6, now your combination is 6-3-4. That is a lot of misalignment. That's going to hurt you. Oh my God, is that going to hurt you? That tells you how much mental work you have to do. Because what you have to do is pick up perspective 2 or 3 or wherever you're stuck at. And now you have to go through all of the stages of growth to teach your subconscious mind that it's okay to grow. That's where shadow work comes in. And you have to start moving yourself through all the ethical stages so that you can advance. So you have to grow your subconscious mind so that it matches your ethics. That is healing. That is conscious healing. That is triadic healing. That is exactly what we do here. It's conscious healing. It is knowing and being conscious of these stages of growth that you are growing through from each stage to the next so that your subconscious mind aligns with your ethical expectations and needs. Once that happens, then your environment comes into place and you reenact your environment on whatever ethics you are. So when you are aligned at 5-5-5 or 10-10-10 or whatever your ethics are, that is where you are. And now you are at peace. That is where happiness is. That is where you are aligned. That is where Mercury retrograde won't hurt you. That is where everything is fucking awesome. But if you are at 6-2-4 or 6-3-3 or 7-2-1, oh my God, are you going to be in some serious pain? And you'll think you're insane. You'll wonder what's wrong with you. What's wrong with you is you were abused so that your subconscious mind is being held back while you are ethically growing. That is the misalignment. That is combination theory. Once you understand your combination, you will be able to track your progress through your development in your mental health. You'll be able to track how your progress is going, and you will be able to just glance at the stages of growth, see which ethics you need to internalize and learn in the appropriate order. You cannot skip lessons. You must learn these in order. It is ladder learning. It is stacked learning. You cannot move on to the second and third stage until you have internalized the first and the second stage. So understanding what your ethical perspective is, understanding that you have a high function and a low function, understanding what your parents' perspectives were and which perspective they abused you to keep you held at that stage of growth is going to determine which perspective your subconscious mind got frozen at because it's not safe to grow, and understanding where you are ethically in retrospect to that. If you are a vegetarian or a vegan, you are at 6th perspective and higher. If you want to own your own business, but you're not really thinking about the planet, you are a perspective 5. Where are you on this spectrum? Where are you with all of this? How much growing do you have to get to? Triadic Healing absolutely walks you through all the stages of growth systematically and strategically, and we start you right off with self-care and self-comfort. We basically provide the nurturer role for you so that you can literally start providing the self-care for you. Now, self-comfort will be covered in another video. There is a lot to it, and it's not something I want to get into here. So thank you so much for joining me. Go ahead, like, follow, subscribe below, follow. And if there is something that resonated with you in this video, go ahead and comment below. If you want to, this is DIY Triadic Healing. So if you want to get more hands-on, if you want Q&A or anything like that, I have an integration workshop called Journey into the Self, where you can join our weekly session on Thursdays at 6 p.m. Become a member. It's $140 a month, and you will get access to all of our classes. We have communications classes, boundary setting classes, and emotional management classes. That's included, as well as the weekly workshop. It's a 3-hour workshop that includes Q&A, troubleshooting. So if you are wanting to do the DIY Triadic Healing, which is free, it has also, in addition to it, the workshop. If you are wanting a one-on-one session, that is also available at $2,000 a month. Go ahead and click on the information below and you can sign up. Go ahead and have a look at my website and you can get started with Triadic Healing. Thank you so much, and may the kindest of words always find you.